Welcome to the weeks in sports cars. That would be plural after we had a bit of a, technical meltdown last week. Anyways, welcome to the weeks in sports cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast presented by Cooper Tires. Once again, we have our main man, Graham Goodwin, in a really, really cool place. Tell our dear listeners where we are communicating. You are communicating from this week, brother.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Yeah, I'm actually broadcasting at the moment from just looking at the podium just opposite my place in the media centre at the Temple of Speed that is Monza, middle of the Royal Park, just outside Milan. Wonderful place to go and watch a motor race. We're here with European Le Mans Series, just sitting to my right and listening, I think live for the very first time, is going to be my partner in broadcasting crime this weekend. Not Johnny Palmer, because he's at the Nürburgring 24 Hours, but Alex Brundle is here as well. So it's going to be me and Wial, and the other Wial, and we're going to be broadcasting both the Michelin Le Mans Cup and the European Le Mans Series. Cracking grid again for that. But I think before we get anywhere close to that, MP, you're going to want to talk about what happened last weekend.
Yeah, well, first of all, I hate you. And I do wish I was in Monza. Granted, here later this afternoon, I am on a flight to Indianapolis where I'll be there for 18 days, believe it or not.
Don't you hate you quite as much?
And always good to have a Brundle in proximity, so definite quality there. You were in a lovely, lovely place called Belgium last weekend, covering the opening round of the World Endurance Championship. I was in a lovely state of Ohio and Bliss there for IMSA's return to the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course. First time endurance race cars have been there in 5 years. My portion of what happened last weekend, relatively normal. Cars went around the circuit. No major issues. Big win. We'll get to that a little bit later. You, on the other hand, apparently went to a motocross race. We're talking about acrobatics, aerobatics, all kinds of things. Not to make light, but good Lord, brother, I don't think anyone was expecting to have young Pietro Fittipaldi end up in a multiple bone-breaking incident at Raidillon, trying to make it up the hill to Eau Rouge, and then to follow that up, yet another BR01 LMP1 non-hybrid chassis. I mean, talk about looking more like a SpaceX project than an LMP1 car. Bring us into not just what happened, Graham, because I think a lot of folks might have seen the footage or otherwise, but bring us into the weird happenings with this class. This thing might be decimated almost from the start.
Well, where do we start? Okay, well, let's start with what happened last. Toto won. There's a shocker. Equivalency technology certainly under the microscope, not because Toyota won, I think that was quite expected, but because the second Toyota didn't just finish second, it lapped the remaining field, albeit, as we're about to explain, it was a rather weaker remaining field than otherwise we would have perhaps expected at the beginning of the weekend. So Toyota ran pretty much faultlessly. The second Toyota, starting from pit lane, started a lap down, but still lapped the field in a 6-hour race.
Crazy.
Whether or not I think that one, is for another day. Will we see a major change before Le Mans? I'd be very pleasantly surprised if we did. I'm expecting there maybe to be a bit of a tweak, but to be blunt, that's not good enough. The cars that ran faultlessly should not have been, if you like, overtaken with a lap deficit and then lapped. That's not correct in a 6-hour race in the same class. That's Toyota. Rebellion ran fabulously well. Faultless for one of the cars, the car that actually finished on the podium. Unfortunately for them, was then excluded for the plank, the wear plank being too badly worn underneath the car, but still finished with their second car with a overall podium in the WEC.
It's a very, and I might be off of my year, but Michael Schumacher 1994 at Spa, where the minimum ride height, let me rephrase that. Minimum ride height, not so much of an issue in that case, but there was a maximum wear allowable with the plank inserted beneath the car. Obviously, the plank and plank thickness, just from a little technical insert here, is the lower the car runs, the more downforce it can make off the floor. So the plank in its thickness, plank is inserted. There's a desire for the cars not to dip below a certain ride height to get into that extra downforce range. And yet, if a car is doing that and running lower, it will wear away the portion of that plank beyond what the technical inspectors are looking for. And as they found with the Rebellion after the race, that plank was a wee bit too thin, which again suggests that it was making more downforce than the other cars, and we had one exclusion. So I'm not a fan of plank-based exclusions, but as we've said many times in our podcast here, Graham, the rules of sports cars, seemingly, that's why we almost go racing, just so we could have rules and follow them.
We do seem to be getting used to staying in media centres till the wee small hours, then finding out something unfortunate. But that was basically what happened on track during the pointy end of the race. You've already covered, we did have what proved to be an airborne moment, or several moments, for Mateusz Isakian in the number 17 S&P Racing BR01. Now, just to put aside a couple of points I think have been made on social media all around, as many of the listeners will know, I'm part of the WEC's broadcasting team. We didn't see it live. We did not see what happened live. It wasn't on any of the cameras that we had access to in the booth. We genuinely didn't know what had actually happened to the 17 until I left the booth. I got some reports from readers via social media and a couple of emails. A friend of mine who is a trackside marshal told me that he'd seen the end of the incident. Then another trackside marshal again said that he'd seen a portion of the incident. The problem in these cases that is you can't really call that unless you've seen it. And I think the difficulty here is that until you've actually seen either a still picture, which came for the first time yesterday, or actually late the day before, or video, which we saw for the first time yesterday, you'd be a brave man to actually call that. What we had initially been informed was that the car had hit the barrier on the the inside of the track at the top of Radion, and had rolled along the top of the barrier. And I think that actually did happen. It was the end of the accident. We hadn't seen to that point was this double backflip. Still unsure as to the absolute cause of that. But that, as you quite rightly said, MP, came on the back of the fact that we'd had this other drama in qualifying for the third BR1. There were 3 BR1 chassis, 2 with AER engines for S&P Racing, and the chassis that was initially supposed to be the spare car for S&P was then sold to Elton Julian's Dragon Speed team. And that rather horribly led to a very nasty set of injuries for Pietro Fittipaldi, with what looked a heavy hit at Rouge into Radion. But I don't know what you thought, MP. It's not the worst I've seen.
That's the thing that really surprised me, and I think many others. From what I understand, and this is understanding from half a world away, so this is not me pretending to have great insider knowledge that no one else does. From what I understand, the damage done, the primary damage done, was from the left front wheel and suspension assembly being impacted into the tub in that accident. And that is where what triggered the injuries that Pietro had. I think you and I have seen photos of the car post-crash up close inside the tub. Someone was showing me those in the paddock Sunday morning at Mid-Ohio. And it is hard, having not seen the car prior to some of the, I'm not sure what they call them in Europe, Graham, but here we call them the jaws of life, the effectively the big cutting,
yes, exactly the same here,
cutting machine to cut away bits and pieces. We do know that was required to get Pietro out of the car. So it's hard to say exactly what was impact-related damage versus what was safety extraction damage intentionally performed to the car. I can tell you that I have had texts from or emails from race engineers who have said, I don't know who designed that car, but that person should never be allowed to design a race car again. Which, knowing that Dallara was involved from the manufacturing side, I'm not casting aspersions here. I will say that I think, to your point, great questions about, wow, any time you crash as you are heading down the hill and then hanging a hard right and peaking up the hill, you're going to be at a high rate of speed in any machine. Whatever you're driving, whether it's a GT car or whatever, a road car, that is a place where you'll be traveling at a high rate of speed. And if you are heading into the tires there, that is certainly going to be something that hurts. But the amount of damage and the amount of physical damage that was incurred, there was a definite disconnect to me.
Yep.
To your exact point, Graham, of, that sure looked like a flip the door open, step out, and shake your head and wonder what was happening type accident, not a, holy cow, this kid's going to be down for 2 months, broken leg, broken ankle, have heard. I mean, and I've texted with Pietro, but I'm not going to get into asking him, hey, tell me the extent of your other injuries. I've heard that his face, there might have been some facial injuries from him hitting the steering wheel. I mean, it just sounds, again, like
it's not good.
The amount of physical damage done and vehicular damage done for what that accident looked like seemed really, really strange.
Well, here's the if there's good news to be had from this, here's the good news, is that there is a full investigation underway that got underway immediately after the incidents on Saturday. I have zero doubt that will now encompass what the issues were for the 17 car the following day. And in sharp contrast to Pietro, I can tell you Matevos Zakian is here at Monza and will race this weekend.
Oh, wow.
In the other S&P Racing LMP car, the P2 Dallara. Now, what impact that will have on the plans for Le Mans? It's a different. Sorry about the impact piece. Yes.
What impact? All right, there, Mr. Funny. Ha ha.
That's a Freudian slip. But let's not forget, all three of those LMP1 cars are full season entrants for the WEC, which means they're entrants for the Le Mans 24 Hours. That's coming up remarkably quickly. So what do we know about what's happening there? There is no news at the moment about whether or not those cars are, at the moment, they are confirmed entries. There are stories out there. Racer have run some, we've run some on DSC around what the intentions are from Dragon Speed's point of view. But I think it's fair to say that the investigation needs to be comprehensive and rapid to remove any sort of doubt as to whether or not those cars will or won't start, whether that's 1, 2 or 3 of them, won't start the Le Mans 24 Hours. I can tell you there's no spare tub, which means that, to my mind, the absolute bare minimum we're talking about here is production of 2 new tubs. I think you would probably agree with me that there's unlikely to be approved to race without a further crash test. So that means 3 spare tubs, and there are just about 3 weeks to go before those cars should be on track and at the Le Mans test. I'm sceptical about whether or not we'll see all 3 of those cars at the Le Mans 24 Hours.
And
there's one other.
I was just going to throw in on the topic of crash testing. It's one thing, Graham, to say, well, we're going to do an additional round of crash testing, meaning the one that we already did, we're going to do the same things again. There's the second direction of we're going to do additional crash testing, but we are going to look at loading different portions of the tub than we did first time. Obviously, tub was crash tested and passed. So the point of interest and what will be, we will try and find out, dear listener, is more crash testing, yes or no? If so, will they be looking to just try and load different areas of the tub to see if there are failure points that from the traditional places they tested might be exposed? And then there's the third option, which is the one I'm wondering about, which is, hey, we don't want to test the same tub. We feel you might need to go back and make some changes, additions, add additional fortifications, whatever it might be. That's the thing I'm curious about, because that, Graham, that's a lot different. Producing a tub takes quite some time, but
Yep.
getting something in place for Le Mans, not out of the scope of possibility. If there is a call that says no, we're not going to put out another one of these and try that. You need to go back to the proverbial drawing board, the actual drawing board, and come up with something that is better or different, because we don't think this one is actually sufficient. That is where we could have real problems, because it's a much longer timeline.
Well, two other points here. One, I think that's your better place to answer. I know you're a better place to answer than I am. The other one, just to add a little bit of colour here. The question, I guess, here is about the capacity at Dallara in particular, because, of course, we are now in the month of May. And Dallara pretty stretched in the month of May with another area of the sport very close to your heart, MP.
Yeah, and that's where they have their American base is actually in Speedway, Indiana, which is the physical location of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And that location, while they are not doing big things like tubs, they do handle production of smaller bits on the IndyCar side, and I would assume do some things on the Cadillac DPI IMSA side. So I think, for the most part, this would not be something where anything with the Indy 500 would have any source drain on what they might need to do back in Italy, but also keep in mind that with Dallara being a central part of the Haas Formula One program and all the other feeder series that they look after, it is a good question. How prepared are they to hit the panic button in this case, throw a ton of resources at it? We can say, I'm sure, that the BR organization, our friends at SMP, I should say, with the BR chassis, we can assume that they are saying, we have spent a fair amount of money to have you produce a capable LMP1 car for us. What do we need to do here? And back to a central point. We're not necessarily pointing the finger at Dallara.
No.
We do know that, on the BR chassis side, that the SMP folks have had, very, very heavy design role here, et cetera, et cetera. So, again, it's not as if this is a big investigation, Graham, but it will be interesting to find out exactly where the crisis management ball is grabbed. Who is going to extend their hands and take this thing and say, okay, we're after it, this is us, we're going to handle it, regardless of who penned the tub, regardless of who manufactured the tub. There's a clear need for immediate action and swift results to take place. And I'll just re-emphasize that you and I think all of our listeners know how hard-edged the ACO and FIA happen to be when it comes to crash certification, safety, everything. This is not going to be an area, for sure, where a millimeter of leeway is given. I think this is actually going to be a very hard month to 5 weeks, Graham, because we are not going to see the French organizations take a laissez-faire approach to this. This is going to be hard-edged. Prove to us this car can get through a race safely, that it can get through crash testing. Not happy times ahead.
And correctly so. The other part to the story, the kind of the ending part of this part of the LMP1 dramas, because there's yet another one to come in this little series of LMP1 dramas brought to you by the Weekend Sports Cars, is that, of course, the additional driver set to join the team for the Le Mans 24 Hours is none other than 2009 Formula One world champion Jenson Button. And by an amazing coincidence,
Your travel partner.
Absolutely. We drove here to Monza, and we actually left Tuesday evening to have a leisurely run down through France and through and across the Alps, as it turned out. And were delayed marginally at the port. dropped across to grab a coffee for the guys as we were sitting there in the queue, and the lovely lady behind the counter of the coffee bar said, "You never guess who's round there in his Ferrari, Jenson Button." And sure enough, it was indeed Jenson. Went and had a quick chat with him. He was indeed en route to Manicourt in central France to test drive what it has to be said is the sole remaining undamaged BR1. Was fully aware of the incident that had befallen Pietro Fittipaldi, was completely unaware of what had actually happened to the 17. So he did drive the car yesterday. I've seen some social media posts, and hopefully he can catch up with JB before the end of this weekend. But I gather that test went very well. But, it shouldn't be the case that the driver concerned with a program makes a difference in these cases, and it certainly doesn't make a case ultimately to the need to make those changes. But in terms of the attention that it draws, he is a very big name going into a team that, it has to be said, has had one hell of a poor weekend behind them. Let's wait and see whether or not that makes any difference. There you go. So that's part one of dramas in LMP1 racing from the Spa-Francorchamps circuit. Part two, though, MP, were the two cars, of course, that didn't start the race.
Yeah, and so this is the thing that has me and you and many others concerned. We have touted the great work done, genuinely great work by the WEC and the ACO to repopulate, to restock its LMP1 class after all but one factory pulled out of the big showcasey hybrid tier. Now we have below, or in theory, parallel with Toyota, a wonderful assortment of privateers in big, powerful LMP1 non-hybrids. Again, in theory, eye-to-eye level, we are all running at the same speed. As you already mentioned, that didn't happen, not by a long shot. But I guess more critically, we didn't have as many playing. We didn't have as many on the grid as we were meant to. Obviously, we had a crash-related withdrawal. We had a flip in the race that reduced that number, as some of you might hear my cat Rosie complaining for no reason behind me. But yeah, if we're moving on to Le Mans here, there has to be a question of how many of the non-hybrid LMP1s would be on the grid, knowing the semi-collapse. Is that too much, Graham, at Spa? What might happen financially? We know that as you covered and broke, the dear folks at Ginetta, who are intending to have a strong presence on the Spa grid. Yeah, not so much. Do we see any reconciliation there as we head into Le Mans? What are you forecasting?
Well, let me fill you in as best I possibly can. As things stand today, and we're recording this on the Thursday, ahead of the ELMS and Nürburgring 24 Hours weekend, I do expect to see the Ginettas on the grid. I think there is rapid and very good work going on a number of fronts, not least from Ginetta's Lawrence Tomlinson and co. to achieve that. It has to be said that Lawrence's interjection at Spa was a very welcome one. Some high-level meetings to discuss the reality of the issues. It's very easy, isn't it, in a packed paddock, very busy race meetings, for the rumours and the gossip to take control. What this helped to do was to make sure that there was absolute honesty with the powers that be and the ACO and the WEC, both technically and in sporting terms, as to where the problems were, the extent of those problems, and indeed a plan to recover from those problems. So as things currently stand, there is a huge amount of work underway to ensure that the Ginettas are indeed going to take up their entries for the Le Mans 24 Hours. What the game was, as many listeners I know have caught up with from the comments I've seen on Facebook and Twitter elsewhere, was that they were running the very bare minimum they could to retain their WEC championship places. Correctly, they needed to actually show at the race meeting. They needed to do some running. In the meantime, between now and the Le Mans test weekend, pretty clearly there's some major commercial prerogatives that need to be actually fulfilled. But beyond that, they will also, of course, need to test, because one thing that is lacking for the race organisers, we mentioned briefly equivalence of technology, but the race organisers will need to see some data from those cars. So at the moment, there's been precious little of that. They only did basically establishing laps, out and in laps at the in the free practice sessions for the Spa-Francorchamps 6 hours. They will need to do rather more than that. So some busy days and nights, I'm sure, ahead for the guys at Ginetta. We could go into the ins and outs of what everybody presumes has actually happened here. I can tell you, I think I said this previously, MP, that most people doing the guessing game of what's actually happened here have actually got it wrong to a greater or lesser extent. There is an issue in terms of some of the money that it was intended to make this program tick, not arriving in time. The reasoning behind some of that, though, is, well, shadowy makes it sound somehow kind of as if something dodgy is going on. It's not that at all. What's happening here is it's a perfect storm of circumstance for the team, for the manufacturer, for that matter, for the engine maker and all the other suppliers, and the organisation behind trying to pull this all together, which is TRS in China. So TRS in China, as things stand at the moment, struggling to actually make those funds flow, but that does not appear to be a situation of their own making. Let's wait and see how things pan out the next 2 or 3 weeks. But for now, for today, I can tell you that anybody actually just putting the marker pen of death above the number 5 and the number 6 cars, you might be a little premature for doing that. Let's wait and see what happens about the 3 BR1 entries to see whether or not they might actually be at more risk at this point. Let's wait and see.
Tell me a little bit, Graham, about GTE Pro and AM. Saw obviously that Ford had a wonderful day to start the season. Also saw a wonderful note about Aston Martin as well, and they're reaching a fairly awesome number in terms of victories. That was the 2 parts, honestly, of the event that I was not able to track as much as I wanted while covering a race in the middle of America, but seemed like, again, at least from what I have read, seemed like that there was quality going on in both GT classes at Spa.
There was, and oddly enough, the 2 marks you just name-checked, Ford and Aston Martin, had a real good news, bad news sort of day. For Ford, it was a first ever win in the WEC for the 66 crew. Ollie Pla, Stefan Mucker, and Billy Johnson scoring his first WEC win as well, which is great news. Stephen Kilby had a brilliant time with an interview with Billy after all this.
He's the best.
And thoroughly enjoyed his time with a very pleased young American. So great run from them. Another terrific shunt, though, for the other car, the 67 car, in the hands of Harry Tinknell. We were saying about whatever we say about the LMP1 concerns. My God, did Ford and Multimatic build a strong race car, because I saw that and I winced. But Harry Tinknell, having had the front left ripped clean off the car by a not dissimilar impact to that suffered by Pietro Fittipaldi, was up and in the commentary booth with myself, with Alan McNeish and Martin Haven within, about 45 minutes of that happening. And, whilst I think was a little sore, and I'm sure was be a heck of a lot sorer the following day, was able to relay exactly what he felt had happened. That looked to me like some kind of rear left failure. He was a passenger after that. You could see the full brake force being applied, but he was carrying so much speed through. So 66, a brilliant win. 67, looked like they were going to feature, but crashed out very heavily. But the Porsches very much in the mix. The Ferraris, not so much. We had some good wheel-to-wheel stuff through the race. The BMWs and the Aston Martins, the new Aston Martins, just nowhere. Now, you pays your money and you takes your choice. Either they've got the sums wrong or the BMP sums are wrong. We've seen these games played before Le Mans before, and I'm at the stage with this debate now where, MP, I'm just going to say, I'm going to butt out of this one. I'm not going to say you're right or you're wrong. Time will tell, and we will know in June. But I'd say this much, that if you are playing games, guys, you're going to get caught either this side of Le Mans or after Le Mans when things change around dramatically. And at that point, as a journalist who has suffered the slings and arrows of teams telling us we're right, we're wrong, we don't understand this, that, and the other, understand perfectly what the potential options are here. If we see those new cars come out with a not dramatically dissimilar a balanced performance, or for that matter, a fairly dramatically dissimilar one, then I'll be calling foul. It's getting boring now, actually. We do need these guys to play by the same set of rules and play the way the sport was meant to, was intended. Both the BMW first race, of course, the WEC, we've seen the cars in IMSA already, and the Aston Martin Vantage, the new car with the twin turbo V8, making its world race debut, were literally nowhere. Q&amp, meanwhile, great battles up and down the field. It ended up, though, with an all Aston finish between the defending champions in the 98 car, Pedro Lamy at the wheel, and then the debuting in the WEC TF Sport team, the number 90 car, Ewan Hankey at the wheel of that car, and they had just a corker of a battle. The Porsches looked very strong for a wee while. We had Ferraris in the mix for a short time, but it came down to a cracking battle between the two old war horses. The V8 Vantage GTE still sounds fantastic. And again, you're absolutely right. It was another win in the class for Aston Martin. It means across the two GTE classes, they now hold a record number of wins against all opposition. Across all classes, that means Ferrari and Porsche both. And should say, by the way, in a quirk of motorsport history, Toyota scoring their 17th WEC victory means that they equal the total achieved by both Porsche and Audi. So all three hybrid manufacturers today sit with the history books reading 17 wins apiece.
Wow. Well, we had some other numerical fun. At Mid-Ohio, we had Ricky Taylor earning his first win for Roger Penske, the Acura Team Penske effort, dominating the weekend. Led every single practice session and qualifying, not just with one car. It was an Acura ARX 05 DPI 1-2 every session of interest, Graham. All three practices, qualifying 1-2, race 1-2. There was no question which Mark was absolutely on the boil from the beginning. Also fun to see that not only did Ricky win his first race for Roger Penske, he became Roger Penske's 50th driver since the team was formed in the late 1960s to win for Roger. So that's out of 99 drivers that Roger has hired throughout the year. So good little piece for Ricky there. I know that had you been in Mid-Ohio, I think you would have been impressed, mate, because, again, it had been 5 years since endurance racing had competed at the track. Whenever you have a break like that, you're concerned. Have we severed something with the local fans? We know that folks come in very heavily for the IndyCar race. There is a NASCAR, almost a NASCAR. We know that I make up a new word every episode. It's not intentional, but we need to start writing these down because I'm coming up with my own language. It's a bad language. It's an uninformed language. We know that one of NASCAR's second-tier classes appears at Mid-Ohio, and that tends to have a very strong turnout. But there was a question as to whether fans would come back for sports cars, and they did. Wasn't as strong as an IndyCar event, but it wasn't that far off. So I was really happy to see that. It was very promising, knowing that IMSA was taking a little bit of a gamble, going back to a place it had effectively turned its back on in the merger with the ALMS and Grand Am when all that kicked off in 2014. So just crowd-wise, that was a wonderful thing to see, Graham. But just watching the DPIs in action, watching the P2s, I wrote a little commentary about how it's time for IMSA to separate those classes in those models in 2019. That was one thing that stood out for sure. And I'll reiterate here, our dear listeners, we try not to just regurgitate what happened. We assume that you either watched the race or have read about it. So we're generally try and bring a little bit of different insight to things. This was the main takeaway, Graham, that with the heavy neutering of the DPI class to try and slow it down, to bring the WEC P2s forward, the spec P2 cars forward. We had that happen at Long Beach, where I thought and many thought that the P2s would leap forward, would be truly competitive, not just over one lap. That's another thing I've seen folks say. Well, hey, the P2 cars can be. they are absolutely capable of competing for wins against DPIs. No, they're not. Absolutely not. Not in the traditional configuration that we have seen and that we saw last weekend. What we've had IMSA do, based on a promise that was made to the WEC P2, the privateers that run the Orekas and Ligers and such here in IMSA's prototype class, after getting trounced last year, even though that breakthrough win by Renger van de Zande and Mark Goossens at Laguna Seca stands out as such a fun and amazing thing. For the most part, we have heard that, from United Autosports and Zach Brown to JDC Miller Motorsports with John Church, there are a lot of folks very bumpy about being told that, hey, if you turn up in 2018 with your P2 car, you're going to have a shot at overall victory, and that has not been the case. So as a result, we're 4 races into the season. IMSA, after the first 2 races, where it was clear, Graham, that the P2s had no shot, IMSA going into Long Beach said, okay, we're going to take a big swing. And that swing involves pulling back the DPIs because we're not going to break from our promise to leave the WEC P2s untouched. Didn't happen. Long Beach was another mass murder scene where the P2s just had nothing. They just had nothing in race mode. Another round of BOP adjustments were made for Mid-Ohio. This is a big sticking point, Graham. Big sticking point, because the BOP that came out, and this is our first usage of BOP, I think, although we did use EOT, equivalence of technology, on the WEC side, so this might actually be the second instance. I think, it kind of qualifies. 2 of the 3 we grant ourselves. There was some bumpiness because the BOP tables that came out, Graham, ahead of Long Beach were stated for Long Beach and Mid-Ohio, which certainly gave everyone in the prototype paddock the belief that, okay, this is 2 rounds that we are going to be locked into this. Well, a second prototype-only BOP came out for Mid-Ohio, and at least according to one manufacturer, they relayed that they raised this point with IMSA. Hey, what the heck? You said it was for 2 races, and now you hit us again. Well, you tell me, Graham, whether you think this is a valid answer or not. In that Long Beach / Mid-Ohio BOP that came out, there were GT classes included. The answer as to why there was a second prototype-only BOP for Mid-Ohio was, no. What we sent out for Long Beach and Mid-Ohio, the items that were the Mid-Ohio part, those are just for the GT cars, not the prototype. You buy that one, brother?
Nah,
okay.
No. I think the answer here is it's become such a movable feast. I think that's part of the frustration for it. I mean, to explain my antipathy towards balance of performance in particular is I just don't see it as news. I just see it as nowadays it's a regulatory necessity, I suppose we could call it that way, and I'm getting thoroughly bored with it.
Yeah.
It does seem that there's meddling going on all the time. Yes, you've got the kind of the trap, if you like, between teams and manufacturers that are looking for ways to hide what they've got, and regulators and race organisers that are there under pressure to provide balanced racing where they possibly can to retain the depth, the quality, and the numbers in their grids. And I guess where I'm coming from here, MP, is the frustration is that the more you meddle, the more false it feels. I want to just see them race, and if you get your arse handed to you, then you get your arse handed to you, and you go away and you do better. It's getting to the stage now where if someone is racing let's put it this way, in a not entirely competent fashion, that they do feel as if the opportunity is there to go back, have a bit of whinge about that one, and get things changed to their advantage. It's not the way it should be.
And I'll just throw out a couple of frames of mind here, or approaches to this topic. Obviously, I've written about this, so I've explained a lot of how I'm seeing this and how I don't know if others agree with it, but at least from my perspective, We have a few issues here that have led to my strong belief and urging for IMSA to separate the classes in terms of championships and points. So we have a true full pro DPI factory-based championship and a full Pro-Am championship for the WEC P2 cars. And also, I think critically, for IMSA to stop this crazy thing of just neutering and re-neutering the DPIs and slowing them to a comically lame place in an effort to bring the P2s forward. That's one thing I didn't finish off saying. Shooting the start, wandering around trackside, again, as a photographer, I get to see these things up front, just and up close, look at their performances, not just from the media center on TV, and it was very clear that the DPIs were struggling to get past GT cars in any locations other than long straightaways. If there was a sequence of corners, and whether it was going around or a short burst where you would normally see prototype mash the throttle and squirt past a GT car heading into that next, the upcoming corner complex, really tight and or wouldn't happen because the power just wasn't there. And so that also applies to the WEC P2. So a strange thing, Graham, to see that in this kind of convoluted effort to bring parity to these two different types of prototypes, you slowed them down, the DPIs down enough to where I think we could safely say they're GT cars racing, some GT cars racing with more horsepower than the prototypes. But all that stuff aside, a couple of key issues here, which has led to this. First of all, the back-to-back BOP changes for prototype, that really set off the DPI portion of the paddock. I'm not going to go heavily into this. I suggested it in the article that I wrote. I do know for a fact that a manufacturers meeting was called by IMSA leading into the event. It was actually held, funnily enough, at the local. Good Lord, I'm forgetting the name of the exact facility, but it was held at the fairly famous, I guess you could call it, prison or reformatorium where the Shawshank Redemption was filmed, which is right nearby the Mid-Ohio track. So yeah, one of the manufacturer reps thought it was kind of funny, or are they trying to send a message here that they're trying to drag us into effectively a prison to hold a manufacturers meeting? Is that some sort of way to tell us to pipe down and be good little boys? Beyond that,
was it the Ohio State Reformatory?
Yes, I believe that's what it was.
There you go.
But beyond that, I had heard that separate from this nice, although oddly staged, sit-down, there was a breakaway meeting. And we have had DPI manufacturers essentially saying, we've had enough. Coming together on their own. I don't want to say a mutinous band, but a group that has effectively come to the tipping point of enough. We're spending a lot of money on these cars, and you just keep pegging us back and pegging us back. This has just gotten to a place that's untenable. And I believe some sort of peace agreement was brokered before things got ugly. Again, this is all stuff that I've heard. I wasn't there, so I can't claim for this to be real. But I believe the manufacturers had their own sit-down of, okay, privately, we're gonna steer this in a different direction. And something was brokered so that an additional sit-down with IMSA, from what I heard, took place where we did not have a mutiny. But when you start getting to that point, that tells us that change needs to happen. Secondarily, and this isn't just meant to be about DPIs and the DPI manufacturers, we have the P2 entrants, incredibly important, I mean truly important to this series, as independent efforts, small business owners. Were told something would happen in terms of competitiveness. Some of those entrants then went and sold, Graham, full 2018 programs to sponsors, to drivers, funded drivers, saying, hey, we have been told if you sign up with me or another P2 entrant, you're going to be able to vie for overall wins. Imagine the pressure that a Brent O'Neill at Performance Tech Motorsports, or a John Church, or a Bobby Ergel at the PR1 team. Imagine the pressure they're feeling from drivers and or sponsors, if not both, saying, hey, what the heck? Again, we absolutely cannot point any fingers at those owners. They are simply passing on what they were told. Hey, when we go to these races, you're going to have a shot at victory. Hasn't been the case. Hasn't even been close. Something has to be done. So you have this strange situation, Graham, where talking with the DPI manufacturers, and I did spend a lot of time in the paddock over the weekend, on the technical side, I had more than one telling me we're getting into a place where we would actually need to start changing components on the car to suit the continual reduction in power, right? 3 of the 4 DPIs are turbocharged. Well,
yep.
Those turbos are sized to operate not only in a certain rev range, but with a certain amount of air flowing, boost. There's a lot of technical assembly in terms of components working together in harmony at certain ranges. Well, when you start knocking things down and knocking them down even more, whether it's turbos no longer working in an efficient range, camshafts no longer being correct for either the revs or the power. It's a lot of things that need to change if you're going to either go up in horsepower significantly, Graham, or down. And what we have, frankly, is a lot of down with no adjustments. And so we're starting to get DPIs that, as I mentioned, are running much slower than they can, but they're also starting to not really operate in a very good or happy place. So do you keep going further? And that's the other question here, which is raised. I don't know how much further we can go if they're going to keep taking stuff away from us without, all right, you got to let us rehomologate the engines, because we're going to have to come up with a heavily watered down package to get to this lower number you need to make the P2s comparable to us. So that's one thing. But first of all, we have this strange thing, Graham, of manufacturers investing a lot, yet being pulled back to crazy levels that are almost not working now. We have the P2 contingent saying, hey, we are ending up looking like the bad guys selling a false bill of goods to our sponsors and drivers. Then you have the other thing, which is, I think, Graham, this is just the most practical part of the entire thing we have to accept. If we are going to race, and we're going to ask 2 completely different types of prototypes, manufacturer-based, full factory, and privateer, we need to just let them be what they are. And that's the thing that, to make both sides happy, and to make both sides have them remain engaged, that's where I think we just need to go. And I know that there are folks who say, hey, God, another class? Come on, we're tired of you. We've got too many classes. Well, the reality is that's what we've had. It might all fall under the prototype class, and they might all have the same points, Graham, but we have really had 2 tiers, 2 separate, B grade and A grade. That is the way things have been operating, and that's just a practical reality of what we have. I'll throw this out real quickly too, Graham. What I'm seeing in prototype has become the equivalent of saying, okay, we're going to have 1 GT class. We're going to take the GTLMs, full factory. We're going to take the GT Daytonas, full Pro-Am, and we're going to put them into 1 class just called GT. Can you imagine what Ford and Corvette and Porsche and BMW and Ferrari would think about having to dilute their full factory GTLM cars in order to get down to GT3 based levels? We would say that was insane. We would say, why on earth would you do that? Well, that's what we've been doing here in prototype by throwing these Pro-Am P2s and full factory DPIs together. One other quick item to throw out. We've seen, and we know this to be a fact, Graham, we saw at Petit Le Mans last year, Team Penske showed up with an Oreca 07. Elio Castroneves put the dang thing on pole. They were super strong early, very early in the race. A little bit of contact, some problems. We didn't get to see that play out over 10 hours. But we've seen a full monster team like Team Penske and what they can do with a WEC P2. There aren't any Team Penskes running P2 cars this year, my friend. I don't know of any giant team with massive resources and full Indy 500 winning caliber drivers signing up to get an Oreca, Dallara, Riley Multimatic, or Ligier on the grid in P2. We do know that in this rare instance of a giant like Penske coming in, that holy cow, pole position and true threat to the DPIs could be there. But that isn't what we have. It is not what we have. What we do have, Graham, and this is what I'm going to close on, we have a situation at Mid-Ohio, just as simply as a one-race example, where we have Helio Castroneves on pole. We've got Dane Cameron in the second Acura, 1-2 to start the race. Those two run away, along with the Mazdas, which was wonderful to see Oliver Jarvis right behind and such. The Acuras and Mazdas ran off and hid. We had, in a number of instances in the P2s, Graham, the AM driver start. So we had John Bennett, for example, in the Core Autosport Oreca. Now, we have seen that car fly this year, right? Romain Dumas, Colin Brown. We've seen that car fly at Daytona, at Sebring. When you start a race with three-time Indy 500 winner Helio Castroneves on pole and Dane Cameron, IMSA champion, prototype champion, those two up front, and you start with the AM driver in what has been the most competitive P2 this season, your race is over. And that's not picking on John Bennett, but look at the gap that was created between who's on pole up front, one of the world's most talented race car drivers, and a Pro-Am driver doing the opening stint. Colin Brown is a DPI grade driver, mate. He should be in a Penske team, all right? We know that kid, how's this? Had he qualified the car and had he started second alongside Helio, I have no doubt those two would have put on a cracking race. But the reality is, had that happened, and whenever the two pitted and Helio jumped out and Ricky fricking Taylor jumped in, right, reigning prototype champion, and right next to him John Bennett climbed into that Oreca, what happens? There's nothing you can do with BOP in that situation. So this is where the whole BOP thing with these two types of cars, that's just where the plot goes out the window. Do you do something where in that situation when the AM driver gets in, all of the DPIs lose 100 horsepower? Or the Gibson puts out an extra 100 horsepower to try and balance talent? Again, I mean, there's just some things that you cannot balance. So this is where, again, the argument of, well, we saw what Penske could do with the P2 at Petit Le Mans. Sure, that's an extreme example. The reality is in almost every P2 instance here in America, Graham, there is at least one driver who, while there are some really good lineups, there's still a case where we don't have absolute parity from one driver to the next, so that when we do have a P2 pit and a driver change happens, inevitably, in every case, there is a separation in speed capabilities between whomever's in a DPI and whomever's in that WEC P2, and that is where the ability to win usually gets thrown out the window. There's nothing you can do against that, again, unless you say, hey, non-pro drivers in the car, boom, you get an extra 50 horsepower. Other than that craziness, mate, all I see is going separate championships and getting rid of this, trying to BOP the two of them starting in 2019.
I'm guessing, really, from EMP, we talked just earlier in this show about, sports car racing does have a habit of making rules so complex that we can spend an hour, 2 hours trying to explain what's going on in a single class by regulation. I think the idea that DPIs and the P2 cars could be effectively balanced in some degree, it was a nice idea, but once that's got to the stage where that clearly isn't possible, you can't compromise the overall product. Fans... clearly the idea behind manufacturers coming into something like IMSA, for WEC for that matter, It's to expand the reach, to expand the audience. The more difficult it is to explain what you're doing and how you're achieving it, the less likely that is to happen. Keep it simple. It does cause difficulties for some of those P2 teams. I have zero doubt of that. But have the conversation, find a way to make that good with them, and move forwards. Because, I hear the same kind of frustrations, to be honest with you, from the GTE manufacturers, all of whom, and certainly their drivers, you'd expect of the drivers, saying that, we know that these cars are built to have very much more capability than they're actually ever allowed to display through balance of performance. And your point about the balance between GTD and GTLM being, an equivalent kind of debate is a pretty good one. The reality is that in European competition, a GT3 car runs with rather more power than a GTE Pro car ever will. And that really doesn't ring true as being a kind of sensible way to go through. It sort of feels a little at the moment across a number of areas. And we've talked about a number of them just in this show, MP, that the rule books rather taken charge. And I sort of wonder whether or not a sensible way to approach this might be, when we're getting, as we are, into a new era of potential global prototypes, just take several steps away from it and think in those terms. It's lovely to have new programs, new cars, new teams, etc. Take a step away. Is this what's going to push the buttons for integrating a whole new audience to expand the reach for this part of the sport and the people that make it tick? I struggle at the moment with where we're forced into with a week-by-week debate to see whether or not that's in the interests of expanding the sport, or is it more in the interests of the existing competitors?
I will mention that we have a interesting thing to consider as well that I think might be the halo topic here, and that is beyond rules, beyond promises made, beyond any of those things, happiness and retention. Those are the two things that matter most here. And we have the DPI faction, manufacturers, incredibly unhappy. We have the privateer P2 faction, incredibly unhappy. That isn't good. I think you would have. I think if you were to ask the P2 runners who do, core is really the only oddity in that it's self-funded. They are not looking. They're not renting seats. No one is going there to hire anything. The rest, though, it is certainly a pay-to-play type scenario. For those who are the vast majority of the P2 runners, I think if you were to ask them right now, how are things going with trying to drum up business for 2019, they would punch you in the face because they have nothing to sell, because at the moment they cannot sell based on the results of what people have seen a realistic chance of anyone capturing a victory, going home, holding a trophy, spraying champagne. It really, they have nothing. And so it's opening the door to allow that. And I realize we're talking about a Pro-Am trophy and Pro-Am points, but if you can at least sell that, then you do have something of value to offer. The retention part comes in here as well. You have DPI manufacturers feeling like, good Lord, we're wasting a lot of money trying to improve our cars. I realize that we're talking about homologated vehicles, but these manufacturers have wind tunnels or have access, have engine dynos. They're constantly working to try and make their cars better in the ways that the rules allow them to. The P2 teams don't have that budget, don't have those abilities. So you could say, well, then just freeze everything. Well, sure, but is that really why manufacturers go racing? There's some practical things that sound easy. Freeze everything, dial everything back to Daytona 2017. There are a lot of things that sound easy to do but aren't practical. So what IMSA has ahead of them right now is having to retain their current entrants in the prototype class, give those that might be entertaining coming in a reason to believe that they can have success and enjoy themselves, achieve whatever goals they have, whether it's marketing and promotions on the DPI side, showing excellence, showing development, training new engineers, or being able to go after some sort of fulfillment and trophy and championship chasing on the privateer side. So that's what IMSA needs to do. Those things really aren't technical. It is about appeasement and creating a more solid ground beneath the prototype paddock than maybe we have found at this stage of the season. I need to tell you something here, Graham. We have something pretty cool going on for the month of May with our little Marshall Pruett podcast. My friends at Bell Racing USA, as in the delightful helmet makers, they have come on board as a partner for the month, and we try not to hit you with too many commercials or ads here. Obviously, we have Cooper Tires. They have come on as my primary partner for the entire year, which is amazing. So thank you to Cooper Tires. But this May we are going to have my friends at Bell Racing USA as a partner here with the Marshall Pruett podcast, and a little bit of information about them coming into this year's Indy 500. I love this little stack, Graham. 19 of the 35 entrants are Bell helmet users. So not a small company, not one that is not beloved by the drivers. So they're going to be on board here. They've been around since 1954. A lot of champions have definitely worn Bell helmets into victory lane. I'm going to be sitting down with some guy, Mario. I'm not sure about his last name. Andretti, something like that. Some guy who might have been to victory lane in a Bell helmet at Indianapolis and many other races using Bells. I'm going to sit down with Mario on Friday, Graham, and speak with him about this 50-plus year association with the brand. So that's going to be kind of fun. But anyways, I really do enjoy those guys. They reached out to me in December and said, hey, month of May, let's try and do some fun stuff. So I'm going to be doing daily podcasts from Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which is, I don't know if I should apologize up front for those of you who are listening to this and love sports cars exclusively. Your Marshall Pruett podcast feed is going to have a lot of open wheel stuff coming for the month of May, but there's a part of me that hopes you love both forms of motor racing. So anyways, I will tell
Passion pays, Marshall. Passion pays. People, I think, love to hear the passion yourself, Robin Miller. The guys actually bring to what is, come on, it's not just just a series, but I mean the month of May, it's just an iconic part of world motorsport, and of course across the world we're looking in, we're listening in, we're watching what's going on, and we've talked again on the podcast, haven't we, about the impact that Juan Fernando Alonso had just 12 months ago there, and that has retained some interest in Indianapolis that perhaps had ebbed away in some of the one or two of the fallow years. More power to you, and well done, Bell helmets.
Well, definitely thank you to them. And so with all of that said, we're going to be, I'll be bringing in some Bell Racing helmet little ads into our podcast here, but I'll try not to be too intrusive. And the other thing too, Graham, hey, look at that. I don't know what we've been doing, whether they took pity on us or what, but it's just nice to have, for me at least, a significant company like Bell Racing USA say, hey, we want to get in, we believe in what you guys are doing. And they didn't just say open wheel. That's the cool thing. They said, hey, we want to be a part of all the podcasts that you do during the month of May. So we're hoping that if all this goes well, maybe we'll have another sponsor partner come on board for June and such. So that's the model that I'm just looking to build here, Graham, is instead of packing 15 minutes of ads into an episode, just try and have, obviously, Cooper Tires as our number one, but also have a second and additional monthly partner. So all good stuff.
Well, I'll tell you, so one last part on that. I do recall, I think it was a year ago, one of the major global hubs for Bell Helmet is now in Bahrain. It's part of the technology park that was established around the Bahrain Grand Prix circuit, which, of course, until this year was a key part of the WEC. I think we'll be back there in a year or so's time as well. I'm sure we will, in fact. And my good friend Stephen Kilby toured that plant. Some extremely interesting snippets there. And I will send to you the link for the Facebook page so that people can go back and have a look at what's involved in the science and the actuality of producing a world-class helmet. It's a key part of it. And who knows how many of your friends, my friends, and our listeners' friends in paddocks around the world are still with us because they've been so successful.
Well, Kilby certainly needs to be wearing a helmet at all times. That boy is special, but that's okay. All right, well, before we get into our favorite part of the episode, which is Q&A, and we're going to kick off with the new questions that have come in following IMSA at Mid-Ohio, following the WEC at Spa, and then also get into as many of last week's questions as we can, since, again, we apologize, we had a pretty nasty technical issue after we recorded the episode. That was the thing that killed me, Graham, is recorded it. I thought it was great. I mean, we had so much fun, and something went haywire with the audio, and I was watching the audio levels the whole time, and nothing stood out as wrong. But regardless, we recorded an entire episode while we were both on the road, and things went sideways. Before we get to that, though, I want to share my favorite part from last weekend, and this could only be authored by the criminally insane Juan Montoya. So I am sitting in the media center Saturday after qualifying. I forget what, writing something, editing a video or something. And I got a text and pops up from Montoya. And I won't use the full F word here, but the text says, "Why are you so effing weird?" And I'm like, okay. Now, Montoya and I had effed with each other earlier in the day via text, so this isn't out of the norm at all. I've probably professed my love for Montoya before. He is as hardcore a guy as you can imagine. He's not one where you walk up and just act all syrupy. "Hi, Mr. Montoya, how are you?" You just, you punch him in the shoulder, you give him a hard time, he gives it right back. That's what I love about the guy. So, a text from him saying, "Why are you so effing weird?" didn't stand out as odd, but the context was strange. So I replied, "Weird how?" ? Up pops a photo of me working. And I look over and realize this crazy bastard was in the media center about 10 feet away. And I look over and he's laughing at me like, "Ha, ha, ha, got you." And so he comes over. I'm like, "What are you doing, man?" And he said, "Oh, well, I couldn't get internet service in my motor coach. I was trying to download some movies for my iPad, so I figured I'd come over here to the media center and try and steal the Wi-Fi there to download." I'm like, "Oh, okay, great." So we BS'd or whatever. Montoya being Montoya, he grabs his iPad, walks over to the router that Mid-Ohio has mounted to the wall, and holds up his iPad over his head like the Lion King holding up the little lion cub. He's standing there like a complete kook, trying to hold his iPad, 6 inches away from the router, because, Graham, naturally the download's going to happen faster.
That will make it happen quicker.
So he had his back turned to me while he was doing that. So I walked up, took a photo of him effectively holding, looked like he's holding up his newborn son to the router there. Took a photo, sent it to him, and with a little note of, "Why are you so effing weird?" And so, anyways, he got that and fell down laughing. But this is just life in IMSA with Montoya, who, just a crazy, crazy character.
It just brings to mind that tale of why is Juan Pablo Montoya like a hammer.
Why is that?
Because it's not the sharpest tool in the box.
I love it. Well, my friend, do you want to kick off our...
let's go for it. We're going to go with the new ones first.
Yes, let's do the new ones first. We have to obviously pay homage to those who suffered our failure, by our, I mean my failure last week, technical failure. So let's definitely go with those who decided to come back and ask new questions, and then we will go and honor those from last week as well.
Absolutely. Let's kick off with Alan Smith, who says that he saw Aston Martin is rumoured to be interested in entering an IMSA GTLM team. Are there any other manufacturers out there you guys think could enter GTLM? Well, I'll answer the first part of that, which is they're not rumours, they're actualities, and it's not a maybe, it's a fact that Aston Martin are in the throes of an active search for a motorsport partner in North America, and made very clear to me by the AMR president, David King, that is a very live project, and that is not just about a race program, and that race program certainly would be for a GTLM effort, but also looking for a motorsport partner that would be able to support coast to coast a rejuvenated customer racing support program, which would involve their new for 2019 Vantage GT3 and GT4 products. And maybe more besides, who knows? Let's wait and see. But it'll be interesting to see just exactly who emerges. I'm sure there's a few names that would occur immediately to you, MP, as to be organisations that potentially could fill that void. I bet I could fill in a couple of the blanks myself. But this is exciting stuff. This is sorry, I just paused for a moment as Felipe Albuquerque walked through and just gave us a quick wave. Hello, Felipe.
We'll say hello to our favorite Portuguese driver there. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. But it's exciting stuff. I think we can pretty accurately presume at this point that there is a very high likelihood that we'll see Aston Martin back in a full season IMSA program in GTLM for the 2019 season, and I hope that those what are bound to be beautiful new GT3 and GT4 cars will be also featuring in both GTD and also in the support categories and elsewhere in North America. There is a huge potential market for the Aston Martin brand. They feel like they've been away just a little bit too long. Well, as for the different manufacturers, what do you think, MP?
I haven't heard of anything. I mean, how's this? Of course, we've had the Lamborghini thing. I mean, there's been a couple of things that have been, discussed, etc. I haven't heard much, and I think, like something I discussed with IMSA President Scott Atherton last weekend on the upcoming 2021 new prototype regulations, I think it would be silly for any manufacturer to jump in now with a whatever it might be, knowing that we aren't too far away from a new set of regulations. So I know that, again, at Le Mans we are expecting to hear some more formal timelines and what is happening, not just on prototype, but I believe also GT. So that, to me, would be the major question. When might we have some sort of change, whatever it would be with GT regs? And so I just mentioned that. It's not meant to be a bit of a non-answer, but of course we've heard some manufacturers might want to do something, but any of those manufacturers would be, all of those manufacturers would be looking to the rules to decide whether, okay, is it 5 years out? Great. Well, then we might be able to do something now. But if it's going to be coming in the next 2 to 3, folks would be silly to try and commission something new for 2019. Well, even 2019 would be too early. 2020. So I think that's going to be the thing that truly governs anything new, either GTE/GTLM or prototype. So that's what I think. Let's move to the next question. Adam Bowman, and this one we're going right back to you. What caused that horrible crash of the BR1 at Spa? Well, we got two of those.
Which one?
We know. Yeah. I mean, the first part we know, and that was a hard bottoming. We saw the first real tip that it was an electrical issue was the headlights blinked.
They did.
And we know that the electrical feed to the electrical power steering was interrupted. That's what caused that big wiggle and moment for Pietro, and then cast him off the track while dealing with that, completely, I don't want to say worst place on the track, but just about the worst place on the track that could happen. So 100% not his fault. This is also not the first time that has happened, Graham, with electrical related I don't know if you want to call it shorts or cutouts. We've had this happen a couple times, and I believe with the same, not necessarily the same chassis in terms of that specific chassis, but with the BRs. So.
Well, there's the thing. I mean, talking to people rather better versed than I am in the technicality of these things. To give you, for instance, as to the way that these things can work with a race car, previous iteration of British touring cars suffered from a similar kind of glitch. That under full load, I was told the Ligier JSP2, the last iteration of P2 car before the Gibson engine cars, again under full load, you would get that glitch whereby it would just lose power for a moment. And it's a horrible, horrible moment, because if you're, at full lock, you're needing your steering and you're needing that feel.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, you've got a feel for Pietro. That did look to me like an accident in which he was pretty blameless.
Yeah.
As for the other one, I'm going to be very blunt about this one. I just don't know. I don't know whether or not that car had some form of failure. I don't know whether or not there'd been any involvement by the Toyota, which was in close proximity to it as the cars appeared through Radeon in the one piece of video that we've seen, whether or not that's had an aerodynamic effect on the car. I don't know whether or not it was caused by a curb and just a little bit of air. I don't know whether or not it was caused by the kind of the stripes, no longer sausage curbs. I was initially wrong in the story I wrote. Those sausage curbs went a while ago, but there are painted lines along the outside track limits at Rouge Radeon, whether or not they had a part to play. There is this, though, before I address the second question that comes to this, which is around the lack of coverage that it had, part of which I've already kind of had a crack at in the earlier part of the show, which is people have asked, well, what about the dorsal fin? What about the cutouts over the wheel arches? They're designed to actually help stop a car from lifting off. That's great. And in theory and in practice it works, but momentum is king. Once you've got to the stage where you've got enough speed behind one of those incidents, what they effectively do is they raise the speed at which the inevitable will happen if mass and speed and momentum take over. It's a bit like this. The one thing that will stop me throwing a washing machine across the kitchen, other than my good lady wife who wouldn't like it, is the fact that I can't lift the damn thing. If, however, I was strong enough to lift the washing machine, I would be able to throw it. And I think it's this. It's if you've got enough energy behind that accident, it can overwhelm an aerodynamic defense. And it may just be as simple as that. If there was a failure, if a tyre failure was involved in this, or a suspension failure was involved in this, and if you like, the lady that is the BR1 showed its skirts a little. It doesn't take much to get these things to the point where just enough lift underneath the car will force the kind of dramas that you see there. We mercifully have not seen something that dramatic for quite some years now. It clearly will have to be looked into. I'm sure is being looked into, not just by the powers that be, but by the people involved in both racing and designing the car. But yeah, horrifying moments. As for the other part, as I said earlier, no conspiracy here. We simply didn't know what had happened. I'd heard people telling me at least two different stories. We go under the name, the various names, some of them printable, some of them not. One of them is reporters. Reporters report. Reporters report what actually happened, or they report a individual's view of what happened. It was sufficiently confusing to wait. There was no doubt in my mind that in the few hours or days that followed, we would find it out. We also knew there was already an inquiry underway into the initial BR1 accident. So believe me, absolutely no conspiracy theory here. There's plenty to be talking about anyway. I didn't see it until probably some of our listeners saw it on the YouTube footage. And as soon as we did, literally as soon as I did, and I could actually get online, that story was written. So that's what it is. Don't go looking too far for conspiracy. It just isn't part of the game here. Once we know what happened, once we can get people to comment on what's actually happened, you'll be the very next people to hear about it and read about it.
And there's one other thing to add in. If we look at the flip and what happened here, we had a car that was clearly off track. And as you mentioned, there weren't the really super tall strips.
Sausage curbs, we call them. Yes.
There weren't the really, really tall strips that would just massively flip the front of the car up in the air. But we do, there was enough disturbance there offline to lift the nose of the car. We know that for a fact. The other thing too, and again, I'm explaining the obvious here, the car is going uphill. And at a very high rate of speed. So if we think of, obviously the car is not sitting flat. We have it already at a heavily tilted angle, and it is hitting items that might not be super tall, but are off the intended racing circuit, meant to dissuade running out there. You take these two things of going at 150 miles an hour, whatever the number was, a big rate of speed, at a fairly steep incline, because the corner itself is a steep incline, and then upsetting the front of the car to lift it up and expose it to that onrushing air, you are going to wedge and pack air into the front of the car and flip it. The fin has nothing to do at this point. This was not the car in a moment of yaw, where the back end is sliding in one direction, and that fin, the surface area of the fin, would then play a part in helping to slow down that slide. The air packing into the wheel wells and then venting through the openings at the top. Again, not a big factor here, because we're exposing the front of the car as a whole. Everything beneath the underwing, built into the nose, the floor itself. There's, to me, nothing strange whatsoever about this car blowing over. The intended things that are built into the car to try and prevent and such, those items really did not have any real factor. Those items, if we're talking about the car going in a straight line or in a moment of yaw, I think definitely would have played a bigger factor. But here, the car frankly did what physics said it should do. There was no design failure, no safety failure, no lack of imagination to try and prevent such a thing. The car did exactly what it should have done in that circumstance and flipped through the air. Dynamic, crazy thing to watch, but I didn't see anything that stood out to me as negligent or errant from anything whatsoever, other than a guy being way the hell off track where he shouldn't have been at a high rate of speed going uphill. That's the one thing that was clearly maybe not the smartest thing. Graham, I'm going to jump to next question, because Michael Wallace, we've got 7 folks who gave this a thumbs up. Definite interesting questions that we're not going to have answers for right now, but Michael says, hey guys, with the current rumor of NASCAR being for sale, what could be the possible implications for IMSA? And also is kind enough to say, always look forward to this podcast, ranked to the top with Midweek Motorsport. Super kind of you to say that, Michael. How's this? If NASCAR is for sale, IMSA is owned by NASCAR, all of the properties owned by NASCAR, I assume, this is a big assumption, that those would be packaged as part of NASCAR's sale. But then there's the other question of, if the France family is wanting to sell NASCAR, which we have heard the report that Goldman Sachs has been brought in to seek potential buyers, would those buyers have an interest? Would they want to buy the entire thing outright? Would they just want NASCAR's 3 primary stock car series? Would they want everything else? Again, these aren't things, I don't know. I assume someone would want to buy the whole thing, but maybe those negotiations would not go in that direction. Maybe they could say, IMSA, cool, I don't know, what is it? I think the average company looking at buying a NASCAR that's aware of NASCAR might not really understand that they also own a sports car series. Of value, I would say, Michael, we obviously have the 3 manufacturers in Toyota, Ford, and Chevy in NASCAR. You look in IMSA, there's, I can't even count how many auto manufacturers play there. Money's a lot different, though, Michael. Obviously, there's a fortune being spent by the 3 in NASCAR. I would, again, I'm just assuming that probably just one of those manufacturers spends more NASCAR than all of the manufacturers spend with the series and IMSA combined. But that, to me, is the big question, since we, are the ones who love sports car and want to see its future secured. Would a potential buyer have an interest in, some of NASCAR's other properties, or would they want to just take on the big popular thing, the stock car series, at the expense of IMSA and some of the others? And if that is the case, if that were to happen, that would be a concern, Graham, because with some of NASCAR's money, IMSA exists every year. Without NASCAR's financial horsepower, I would be concerned whether IMSA would have a long-term future.
Yep, I think I'd endorse all of that. Let's go for Brian McCoy. Here's a quick one. Has a driver ever been ejected from a race? Yes, and lots of times. I mean, I guess the easiest, quickest way to answer this one is, I think, in modern times, 2 disqualifications from the Le Mans 24 Hours in living memory, one of which was Stuart Hall. Rather unfairly, I thought.
What did you do, Stuart? Fess up. What did you do, Stuart?
He messed up in traffic, coming towards the Ford chicane, and pitched off the radical LMP2 of Tim Greaves, the man behind Greaves Motorsports in later years, who at the time was a partner in the radical thing. But Tim felt badly enough for Stewart that he actually appealed himself to the stewards to say that he didn't feel that was an appropriate punishment. The other one, and you will remember this one, MP, was Rob Kaufman. And again, I thought that was unfair. That was Rob being squarely blamed for the incident that saw Mike Rockenfeller have the aircraft crash of a shunt on the run down to Indianapolis in the wee small hours. And there I felt that was 6 of one, half dozen the other. Kaufman, I felt, held his line, couldn't possibly have seen which way Rocky was coming. It is just a great big white ball of light, but he was excluded for the event from that. I know he felt very badly about that on every front. Again, I thought that was a little harsh. They're the 2 I can recall for the Le Mans days. I don't know what you've got.
I'm struggling. I hate to admit it. It would probably have to be more on the NASCAR side, because I'm sure, there's been...
bad behavior in NASCAR, surely not.
No, I know. But I am struggling. I mean, true exclusions, and again, I'm thinking more as a race is taking place than post-race.
You'll see people be black flagged on a reasonably irregular, if you like, basis, but true disqualifications, called to race control and literally told to pack your bags and security will take you the belongings to the gate, tend to be fairly rare.
I did recount the story recently, which this is maybe a little bit sideways, but with my friend John Andretti about the time at the in 1989 IMSA GTP race where Bob Wallach refused to let him in the car when it was his turn to his stint. So wasn't an exclusion, but it was definitely a disallowance. It was one driver saying, "No, we're leading and I'm doing too good, and I don't think you're good enough to take over right now. So hell no." The best line was from John Andretti talking about, I was trying to pull the door open on the Porsche 962, and Bob was trying to pull it shut. So, anyways, not ejected, just denied. How's that? Let's see. I'm scrolling down here. What can we find? Jerry Suddeth says, while listening to the radio broadcast of the Mid-Ohio race, they mentioned that the track surface wasn't as grippy as other tracks. And he says, what causes some courses to have better grip numbers than others? Well, Jerry, a couple things. First of all, you have the age of the track surface. That might be the most obvious answer, but it is true. My local track, my home track, Sonoma Raceway, Sears Point, is renowned as a gripless 2.3 mile trip around the Northern California hills. It hasn't been repaved. I mean, in forever. And with hundreds and thousands of race cars pounding around the track year after year, the track surface starts to become polished. The tire grip, the rubber itself, just wears on it. If you want to think of a rock in a stream, that water running over it over years, you get this highly polished surface treatment, and that is what we have at Mid-Ohio. So hasn't been repaved in a really long time. That's one. And two, I would say Mid-Ohio specifically is also subject to very severe weather, where we have big snow, lots of freezing conditions for months and months of the year, and then sun. So you get the surface irregularities that come out of that, whether it is the track sinking a little bit, raising. So you throw in those things, whether it is a track that has been highly polished over the years, whether it's a track that also has new bumps and cracks and other things that emerge, after each winter. Those are all things that upset tires from sitting on all four corners and being very happy and stable. So those tend to be the two major things. I'll throw in one other thing that I thought was interesting, Graham. Indianapolis Motor Speedway had a round of diamond grinding done after the winter, coming into this year's Indianapolis 500. It was fascinating listening to Robert Wickens right after he climbed out of the car when he did his rookie orientation program, and his first comment was, "Man, track is way bumpier than I expected." And so it appears that even though the diamond grinding, which was done to try and smooth out any of the little imperfections that popped up over winter, it seems like they might have actually added some undulations that weren't expected. So just fascinating to hear from a driver who had never been on the circuit to come back, and his first comment was different than what we normally hear from drivers. "Boy, billiard smooth." It was, that was a bumpy ride.
Well, consider this as well. I mean, on the flip side, the last time that we went with the WC to Interlagos, the track had just been completely resurfaced, comprehensively resurfaced, in fact. What difference did that make? Well, the difference it made is that the GTE cars were approaching GT1 levels of lap time.
Wow.
A massive step forward. So do it right, do it with the right surface, deal with the grip, deal with it everywhere, and it can make a fundamental difference to the potential performance around that track. Remember, I think it's, when you watch motorsport carefully, if you watch it just on the TV, you don't go trackside, difficult to envisage, isn't it, the sheer cornering speed, the forces that are involved in that, and that, where mechanical grip really has a part to play. And certainly Interlagos was a great example of, I think every lap record was smashed, but within the first track session, and it just continued along in that vein. So yet track surface, and for that matter, the way in which the tyre manufacturers, tyre suppliers respond to those track surfaces. Have a quick look at one or two of the websites for, in IMSA, Continental, Michelin, in the WC, and the LMS Dunlop. They quite often have things to say about the relative qualities of the track that they're visiting that particular weekend. And it is another point of interest. Gives you something else to look for when you're trying to explain why it is that your car of choice is performing well or performing badly that weekend.
All right. We are about an hour and a half into Weekend Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast, presented by Cooper Tires, also with our friends, Bell Racing Helmets. Graham, we have about another half hour left. You are there working. Obviously, you have some Monza fun to look after here. So, got about a half hour to go. I'm on a flight here a little bit later today to Indianapolis. So, we need to be efficient with our time, trying to pick out some additional higher thumbed up. That's some bad English usage on my part.
I will point out, by the way, before we get into that I have won $20 American today.
What?
I'm very proud of it. I've won $20 American with a bet. It's our wee young elfin American cousin who's with us, young Ryan Kish out of Fresno, California, with us in the Europe for a couple of races to find out whether or not this is what he wants to do for a career before he decides on his college decisions. And I bet him $20 of your dollars that he couldn't walk to the top of the Monza banking without the use of his hands.
Ooh, well, first of all, I'm surprised that someone in Fresno is aware that what college is, first of all. So that's very impressive. Wow, well, you got good old 20 buckaroos. I love that.
20 buckaroos there.
All right.
But what's your next choice then, MP?
Well, let's see. Okay. This is an interesting one, Graham. And we seem to come across this question, not just here, but spoken and written in other places. Comes from Sean Romig. Says, I'm trying to become a dedicated WEC viewer, just as I am with IMSA, but I'm struggling to understand their reasoning with the LMP1 class. Whereas IMSA is at least trying to balance the DPI and P2 cars, it seemed to me that the WEC was trying to ensure Toyota had both a pace and endurance advantage over the non-hybrid cars by limiting the stint length of the latter. He says, I don't understand the draw for non-hybrids to even participate at that point, as it hardly seems like racing. Could you please elaborate on the situation to clear up what I must be missing? And then, because Sean is a very kind human being, he says, thank you, and he looks forward to this show every week. Bring back the Endurance Podcast. Well, we're doing 2 hours, so, we're doing our best, brother. Graham, again, we
Should I have a crack at this one for starters?
Well, why don't you take this one? Because it's a salient point, and I think the parallels that Sean's seeing between IMSA, even though they are trying but not succeeding to balance here, do you think there might be something similar on the non-hybrid teams going, hey, wait a minute, false bill of goods, told us we could compete, we couldn't, or is one race not a big enough sample?
Well, I think the answer is somewhere between the two. Sorry, that sounds terribly balanced, but the reality is they don't yet have enough data to do anything other than having a stab at it. Have they made a good enough stab at it? My view, personal view, no, they haven't. It is not correct that a car that starts effectively a lap down should be able to lap the field, particularly when some of the cars at the front of that field are running untroubled and running quickly. So the answer is no, that's not good enough. Have they done a good enough job at this point? No, they haven't. Do I expect it to stay that way? No, I don't. Will there be a fundamental change before Le Mans? That's a really interesting question, isn't it? Do I think there'll be a fundamental change after Le Mans? Yeah, I do. I hope there'll be a fundamental change before that. But I think we will see one other thing coming into play when we get to the Le Mans 24 Hours. And we saw it just in flashes at Spa. If you had access to the sector timing for the Spa 6 hours, you'd have seen that comprehensively the quicker cars through the first sector were the two Toyotas. And comprehensively the fastest cars through the third sector were the two Toyotas. But comprehensively the fastest cars through the middle sector were the Rebellions. What that means is that they've actually got a better top speed than the Toyotas. They don't get to that top speed as quickly as the Toyotas do, but they can retain it. They can maintain that for far longer. Yes, I think the issue around the false cap on the number of laps per stint, frankly, I think it's a nonsense. I understand the reasoning behind it. I don't agree with it, and I think this is one of those things. It's the hub of that thing I explained a little earlier, where we're bringing in just too much falsehood. My view is, if you want to run at a 97% pace and enable yourself to get another lap on your fuel load, you should be allowed to do so. It's about a balance, about getting those 6 hours done at the maximum possible speed and efficiency. So for me, I think they've painted themselves a little into a corner. I think part of that is because of the political punch that Toyota have. Part of that is because I think there's a degree of trepidation about the potential capabilities of this new breed of non-hybrid. Sounds ridiculous in the light of what we've been talking about earlier with the problems for the BRs and for Ginetta not being able to run. But the potential here is, you go now. You go and ask any manufacturer that you think you've got an in with, and they will tell you that if they had the opportunity to run with those rules, they would build a very good mousetrap indeed, and probably could beat a Toyota if the rules were just a little less restrictive. Great aero, really properly efficient, lots and lots and lots of speed, and I think the reality here is the potential is for these cars to be far closer. There's therefore more potential still for the EOT as things develop and as they learn more to get closer. This time around, I'll be blunt, I didn't think it was a very good race in LMP1 at all. Part of that was a lot of new. Part of that was the problems we saw for a number of cars. Part of that was the deck was stacked.
I am going to predict, anticipate, Graham, that when we get to Le Mans, we are going to see at least one, if not two, overnight EOT adjustments. Because as you said, I don't think there is enough data to truly hit the sweet spot to bring the hybrid/non-hybrids together at Le Mans. And I would be very surprised if we did not see something come out after the first day/night of running on Wednesday that possibly affects things for Thursday. I would say it is going to be a sleepless night for Vincent Beaumenil and his technical team to try and crunch that data and make the necessary adjustments to establish greater technical equivalency between these two types of P1 cars. And I would also be surprised if there wasn't possibly a second one leading into the race after Thursday's running is complete, because what you can't do is, how's this? We know how mad in America DPI and P2 entrants were after Long Beach. And while it's a big race, to us, no one outside of North America knows that Long Beach is an important stop for IMSA. 24 Hours of Le Mans, the Halo, biggest sports car racing event in the world, if not the biggest race in the world. This is not something that the WEC or the ACO can afford to get truly wrong and say, hey, now we got 2 races. Okay, we'll be good when we get to the 3rd. They absolutely have to nail this as best they can. So that's where I think they're going to be really busy throughout practice and qualifying, trying to get things right for the race. Why don't you grab one or two, mate? And I think after one or two here, we need to jump back to last week's and honor some of the great questions we had there with the time we have remaining.
Perfect. Let's go with Kevin Perez-Rodrigo. For Graham, I think both of us actually here. What tracks do you want the Porsche 911 Evo to go to for a record-breaking attempt? Mine is Pikes Peak. Good call. Speaking of Pikes Peak, what's your thoughts on the Volkswagen IDR electric prototype Hill Climb Challenger? Feel free to chime in. Also, Marshall. He will. I'd like them to come here to Monza for starters, and I'd like them to actually try it with and without the chicane, because anybody that's seen the YouTube footage of Audi in their pomp doing full tilt testing here without the chicane and the R18s turning in to Curva Grande at just full tilt, it's an awesome thing to behold. I'd like them to go a lot of places with that car. I'm not one of those that thinks it's an irrelevance. I think it's a joyous thing. I'd like to try just about every circuit that they have driven on, and some more besides. We know that they're doing demonstration laps, but not full speed laps of the Nürburgring 24 hours this weekend. That one, the Nordschleife, might be a step too far, I think, politically at the moment. But I'd like to see just how quick it potentially could be. But yeah, the great tracks, the great events, Indianapolis. Why not? Would be fun to see just how quickly that thing could go around the Palace of Your Dreams there in Marshall, wouldn't it?
Oh, you SOB, you took my choice. Yeah, and actually I'd heard some rumors that Indianapolis might be on Porsche's hit list, so I spoke with IMS President Doug Bowles last week while I was there for testing, and he said, no, haven't heard it. And Doug, we have a pretty good relationship. He would tell me if there was something happening. And he said, no, we haven't heard anything. But he loved the idea. How's this? The IMS road course would be interesting because we've had both IndyCar, MotoGP, Formula One on that. Granted, there's some configuration differences between the three. I would actually like to see them try the oval. Now, there would be one issue, if you want to call it that. There's no braking. So that means no regeneration of the hybrid systems. So it would have to be fully stocked, fully charged. I don't know exactly how long that full charge would last because it would take a lap or two to build up speed. But if you consider that a qualifying run at Indianapolis is usually your out lap, two full warm-up laps, and then 4 timed laps. It provided the hybrid system was charged and full, capable of delivering maximum 1,100 plus horsepower for that entire qualifying sim. That would be fascinating because I don't know if the track record of average of 236, 237 miles an hour average over 4 laps would be broken. But, it'd be interesting to see. There would have to be some changes, though, because keep in mind, the biggest gains made with the 919 Evo, it's not on the power side. All they did, more or less, was just take away the restrictions. The big development has been aero and making just crushing downforce. So while they do have DRS installed for the rear wing, they would actually need to get rid of a lot of the underbody downforce that they have added. So they would have to do some significant modifications to cut through the air. Indianapolis, it is effectively a big aerodynamic test, Graham, and you need a lot of power to put up good lap times, but it's about cutting through the air, piercing it like an arrow, and all that crazy downforce that Neil put to use at Spa and will use elsewhere. It's actually a liability.
Well, I mean, it's not a particularly traditional lap time, because I know there's been cynicism there, but there's one record, and we know they're going to this event, one record that's been around for nearly 20 years. That is the hill climb record at the Goodwin Festival of Speed, has been held by Nick Heidfeld since 1999. In the McLaren F1 car of the day at about 41 seconds. I think they could do that at a canter. There is just that slight issue of the brick wall that they'll need, physical brick wall, by the way, they'll need to actually deal with, but I think that could be quite an interesting one as well. Move on. And by the way, this is United Autosports in the background. They're doing some tyre changing. And should mention, by the way, we mentioned him earlier, Colin Brown is here this weekend to take part in the Michelin Le Mans Cup. But we were with us later. What have we got here? Lots more about the WEC television deal with Velocity. We sort of done that one to death, I'm afraid.
Let me take this one as our last one from this week, and then we'll jump into grab the great one, as many great ones from last week as we can. Aaron Walker asks, do we think that Mazda is on a slow but steady rise to dominance at IMSA by applying the Yost mentality to their race team? I don't know if dominance is how I would phrase things, Aaron, but I would say that last weekend's really strong performance, they were the number 2 DPI solidly and got their first podium with the Mazda Team Yost organization, third place. That was wonderful to see. Big shout out to Ollie Jarvis specifically. His opening stint, not only he passed one of the Acuras and was running P2, but I think Ollie is helping some of the younger drivers at that team to understand the relentless attacking approach that is needed to really play at an elite level. It's one thing to be able to set wickedly fast lap times, Graham, without traffic and without major complications. It's another thing to stand there and watch Ollie having to fight through traffic and really do, go through a lot of extra effort to try and get the Acuras and just chase and fight and demonstrate that just ragged approach to, no, I'm going forward, I'm getting past you, I don't care what it takes. That was, again, I think that is something that the team, especially for some of the junior members, they're going to look at that and realize, aha, that's the level I need to get to. So that's growth, right? That's part of how they improve, why they're improving, just on the driving front. Technically, they were very sharp as well. Could we say that BOP was something that really knocked back the Cadillacs and also the Nissans? Yeah, that was a part of things too. I mean, we've got to be honest here. But I would say this, Graham, and I would say this, Aaron. I think we're starting to see, finally, the Yost influence starting to pay off a bit. I'll add this to close. Spoke with John Doonan a day or two after the race. Hey, congratulations, really good run. He didn't want to hear it. He and they were not the least bit enthused about finishing on the podium. And I like that. Had they been, oh man, thanks, boy, yeah, we got there, woohoo, that would actually be disappointing, Graham, because that would tell us that they're taking, a small achievement as something big. They're not focused on thirds, they're focused on wins. Don't know when that'll happen, but I could definitely see a win being in their future if more Mid-Ohio-esque performances are on the table for them.
Great stuff, good people, great program, and let's hope that one carries on through. Well, let's move back then to the lost tapes, I think we might call this one. Yeah, I think let's go in the opposite direction to normal. Let's start where we actually finished with the recording that did not survive last time around. Let's go with it's another of those FBI safe house names, Dick Mickle.
Oh.
Yeah, What are your guys' most favourite obscure sports cars? They're not well known at all. For instance, an R32 GTR that raced in the 1994 Rolex 24 Hours. I'm going to go first with this one, and I'm going to go with the one that I did mention, name check last time. It was an early edition of the then Brit car, now Silverstone 24 Hours, and fabulous little team, regular exponents of the Nürburgring 24 Hours. This happens again this weekend. And always turned up with something a little bit different. Always played in the class for the cars with the biggest engine capacity, which was the thing back then. And in this instance, turned up not with one of the Audi S8 or 200 saloons that they raced in the Nürburgring 24 Hours, but with a Mercedes S-Class Coupe, a 500 SEC. And it was essentially stock, it has to be said. It was a road car, basically. And yes, with the safety systems that are required for racing, but big engine, big V8 engine up front, 80s, 90s era car. But the tales of that run were spectacular. Changing the front tyres after 14 hours, not because it needed it, but because they thought they should. Yeah. Coming in for a pit stop, it was a cold night. Coming in for a pit stop so they could open the passenger door and throw a picnic blanket in to keep the driver's knees warm. Yeah. And allegedly, and I believe this to be true, during one full service stop again in the dead of night, changing the cartridge in the CD player, which it's fabulous stuff. That car set its fastest lap behind the safety car. Fabulous stuff. Picked up friends, shared a garage in that race with the Morgan Plus 8. Yes, a Plus 8, not an Aero 8, of Keith Arles. And Keith went on to race with the team, the Dirichlet Rennwagen team, I've just reminded myself, for many years at the Nürburgring 24 Hours. Fabulous stuff. And yes, I love the oddball entry. Fabulous.
I'm going to throw in the Cannibal, which was the biggest atrocity of all time. It was a Trans Am style silhouette tube frame creation that had the roof cut off when the World Sports Car Formula came. It was run here out of the Bay Area by Bruce Trenery. It was an abomination. It was the worst piece of garbage ever, but IMSA was dying for entries after the GTP class collapsed, and the Cannibal became part of the lore of that era. It was a junker of the highest degree. I mean, it was truly embarrassing. It was named the Cannibal. I mean, there was no secret intentions of beauty or class, provenance. This was a massive heap of garbage. Wasn't particularly fast, but you couldn't kill it. I mean, the thing was extremely reliable. It even had branding from Autosport for a little while, which I'm guessing came at a very big bargain, but that might not have been the finest marketing exercise ever. But maybe it also just demonstrates the fun tongue-in-cheek aspect of Autosport's editorial team in the mid-1990s. But oh yeah, IMSA hated that car, didn't want it, hoped that it would just fall out the back of a truck and be forever lost between events. But they were so hurting for entries at many races where they had to let the thing through. But yeah, and that thing's been for sale forever. No one's bought it. I don't think anyone should. I think Bruce should just keep that thing. And make sure that it lives on in perpetuity as one of the craziest things ever to hit the track, but was also intended to be just the middle finger to the sports car racing establishment. So, yeah, those things all just collide into perfection for me.
It's not the same kind of thing at all, but as you finish that explanation about the Cannibal rolling by on its dollies back from the scrutineering bay here at Monza is the one-off entry from Racing for Poland.
Yeah.
I like this. It's a LMP3 car brought to us from the V2V series, but
awesome.
Great to see actually nations that don't have a huge racing heritage coming out to play now. We've got in Creventic Racing cars from Romania. The Racing for Poland teams are here. We've got another Polish team in MP3. More and more of this is beginning to happen as the sport seems to be getting a bit more accessible and more Yeah, just more budget conscious. Mark Lieb walks by us as well on his way here. Got an extraordinary addition, by the way, here of both Mark Lieb and Jimmy Bruni to the Proton competition team, which is just great stuff.
And
a couple of rookies there.
Where's ARC Bratislava when we need them too? If we're going to add to the odd.
You know what? Again. You're completely correct. Miro Konopka and his merry band of boys and girls. Team manager is a lady at ARC Bratislava. And, it is great to see some of these Central and Eastern European nations. Another nice little moment there. Steve Hagger, the crew chief from JMW, and Doc Bunkle, who's served some time with the ESM in the States, but is now here with United Autosports. Having a good chat with Mark Lieb, head of customer motorsports, of course, now at Porsche. But those two, back in the days when Mark was driving for Feldmeyer Proton, and Steve, both the Steves, in fact, were with JMW before that Virgo Motorsports, battled hard on track in the European Le Mans Series for the GT class, Porsche versus Ferrari, and indeed at one point Aston Martin. Great to see the family of the LMS responding with real joy to see him back for at least for a weekend. Good to see Mark.
All right, we've got 10-ish, 15 minutes or so left. I think I've found a little sweet spot here for us to finish. I'm going to save the one from Shaiya Adam for our final question, so that
Excellent.
We're going to thank it, since we've yet to define whether, not just gender, but location of who this contributor it happens to be. Let's see. Well, all right, we have two that are kind of in the same vein I'll throw out here. So, John Johnson, good man. Greetings from the Witness Protection Program, guys.
Absolutely.
Thanks for answering my questions and keeping up the good work. My question is, should I be paranoid about Ford getting rid of their road cars? Will Ford be racing cars that it no longer sells? And our dear friend from the Witness Relocation Program is referring to the report that Ford will indeed be cutting the vast majority of its smaller sedans and such. It's essentially going to become here's your tiny commuter model, here's your Halo Mustang, and then here's a bunch of trucks and SUVs. The proverbial family sedans, hot rodish, things that might be somewhat performance-based. They're intending to essentially strip those from the production line, which, Graham, does raise a great question here from John of, well, boy, if Ford's more or less going to become a SUV, large vehicle producer and have a couple of token items left over, what would they have to promote or race with? How do you think that might affect things? I mean, we know the Ford GT program is still in motion, don't know for how long, but what might happen if one of the world's biggest auto manufacturers, kinda, sorta, except for the Mustang model, gets out of things that we would consider raceable and promotable on the racetrack?
It's a great question. A couple of answers, I think, for this one. The first thing is, if you would look at the kind of the international view of the big American truck and the minivan and all these kind of things, the battle that's got to be fought, if that's going to be the bread and butter for Ford, is to prove that they're doing that responsibly and efficiently. And motorsport can help you to do that. Particularly endurance motorsport can help you to do that. So it's not necessarily about whether or not it's based on a Taurus or a Mustang. It's about the technology under the hood. And something like a prototype program moving forward might well do it. Nobody's telling anybody that the we hope globalized 2020, 2021 prototypes have to look like a Mustang. They just have to look with some styling cues like a Ford. We know Ford are interested. We know they're in the room. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's incredibly brave of Ford to make this decision. I think they've come to a decision that they don't have to and shouldn't be competing on every single playing field in the automotive range. And they've come to the conclusion that, you know what, they're not going to win in a battle against South Korean, for that matter Japanese, possibly to come Chinese manufacturers with what many would regard as being the white goods end of the automotive package, the car that you take to work or to the station in the on your commute, or that might be the first car for your kids. That they I think this is a bit of a flag of surrender for them, basically saying we just can't win that battle anymore. Whether or not that's simply in North America, whether or not we see that in Europe, that would be far more of a shock, I have to tell you. But we've seen down through even the years that I've been aware of trends within the automotive industry, Japanese cars stopping being a joke and becoming a massive concern, and then a threat, then a real dominant force. The same with South Korea, and more will follow. I think, though, for the motorsport side of things, Mustang is still going to have a massive part to play in this one. We've seen what things that are going on with, for instance, the Australian touring car scene, where Mustang is certainly going to play a part. I have zero doubt that it will have a future in various aspects of GT racing. But for beyond that, internationally, I think what you're looking at really here is it's going to be about engine technology or propulsion technology moving forward.
Penultimate question goes to Andrew Baca. This is staying in the Ford range, but also a bit of a general open. How far behind their delivery schedule are Ford with the GT? This is obviously referring to the road car delivery. And does it set a dangerous precedent for future GT homologations? Would the FIA be able in good faith to strictly apply the homologation production requirements to a boutique manufacturer like McLaren or TVR, when a major OEM like Ford is completely exempt from that regulation? I agree and understand your point of view, Andrew, that, hey, come on, guys, we don't want you just making up cars to play on the racetrack where you really ignore any of the agreements where you said we're going to make X amount available for road car customers. And, we, although it might be a low production run, we are indeed going to honor the many, many decades of, if we're going to race a car that we sell, we do need to actually sell those cars and deliver them. We know that they've been sold. We don't know that delivery has been as frequent as we were led to believe. So I can't tell you how far behind they are, because, they're probably not going to tell us where they are at in that capacity, Graham. But I do agree, I can't disagree with Andrew's point here that, well, then maybe other manufacturers doing low production runs of their road cars or special cars they want to bring to Le Mans or Daytona, wherever, maybe they can just blow off that requirement as well. What do you think this is, Graham? Is this a policing problem? Is this something that we should be pointing to Ford and saying, bad, 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 blue oval? Or should we be pointing to ACO FIA saying, hey, they told you they were going to do something, you've let them race, why haven't you made them honor what they said from actually putting cars in people's garages?
It's a mishmash, isn't it? And I think, Andrew's right. There's certainly a point to be answered here. In sporting terms, in terms of what we have on the track, I'm less worried than many are. They have not come and dominated the sport with that car. Yes, we've had games played, and we've seen the videos with Nicky Team referring to them as Team Sandbag, blah blah blah, and all of that. And that's all great. It's part of the cut and thrust of this all. And I've enjoyed that and been frustrated by that together with everybody else. But I tend to come at this from the point of view that if you've got rules, they're rules. Yes, rules can have kind of softened edges, but there has to be a reason behind it. And I'll go this far. I think it would be a massive shame. Let's say we got to the stage, I think TVR has been mentioned. Let's say TVR in 2 seasons or 3 seasons' time came forward with a GTE program, and that's predicated by whatever model they're introducing at the time, needing to produce X number of cars, and they, for whatever reason, were struggling. I'd like to almost something written into the rules to say the same level of pragmatism must be applied. It cannot just be for the big boys. There is that safety blanket of balance of performance. This is where actually, you won't hear me say this very often, actually in this instance, balance of performance is actually quite a good thing. It does mean that you can't come in and pull the wool over anybody's eyes for more than, let's say, a race or two. So it's a good thing to actually have that safety blanket of rule book that says we can make those changes. So let's wait and see how things actually turn out. We've already had the next homologation special. I'm looking at one of them right now. It's the Porsche 911 RSR. I don't believe we're ever going to see a road-going version of that particular mid-engined Porsche 911. That, in part, was a response to the Ford. From the purely sporting and aesthetic point of view, the cars are just awesome. They're fantastic things to watch. They clearly race through well. It does, however, cause issues if you are completely playing by the rules as to whether or not you're able to keep up within the parameters you're dealt for instance, a Corvette, etc. The BMW, for instance, that is not a BMW body shell that in white you could take off that car and put on a road car. That there are differences, marginal differences, but differences nonetheless in the size of that car. So it has been around in the sport for a little wee while. This is a pretty extreme example of it. Is it gamesmanship? Is it failure industrially by Ford and by Multimatic? I think there's elements of both. I think they found themselves in a hole that they were struggling to dig themselves out of. And you've probably seen Multimatic's Larry Holt, as I have, looking really remarkably stressed about playing catch-up with the Ford GT program.
Is that why his hair is so frizzy and blown out? Is that the stress?
He was not that long ago, immaculately coiffured. He could have made it as a catwalk model, Larry, if he didn't use expletives quite so often. Look, I don't think this has been as much of what we would say in the UK, Mickey-taking exercise as many people think it was. I think there have been problems with that programme. I don't think they've let it obsess them to the degree where they've let it get in the way of other things. They have progressed with it. There are road cars. Are there enough? No. Does it mean that's a massive advantage handed to Ford? Well, no. I don't think it does. I think we've gone through most of the gamesmanship we're going to see with the programme. I'd be delighted to encourage them back with whatever it is they choose to bring to the track next. If you don't want them to do it, write a better rule book and don't give them the waiver to allow them to do it. But the reality is they have added to the show in the time that they've been with us on both sides of the Atlantic.
I want to ask Graham if we can do a little bit of overtime, because there's one question here that I would really like to add in that we actually covered last week, and I realized that I think instead of having Andrews as the penultimate question, I wanted to add in one here that I missed before we get to Shia Adam. Is that okay?
Perfectly right. Are you sure it's Shea Adam? I thought it was the other way around. Is it Adam Shea?
Hey, see, you might be on. This could, we might have a really heavy listener base that are all in witness relocation programs. Yeah. We might be onto something. I wanted to answer the question sent in by Alex Eichmiller. He said, Marshall, the past couple episodes you've spoken about getting into the sport from an engineering perspective and for journalists, but how about those interested in photography? What are the best ways to get your pictures out there, shared, and noticed? So, in the episode that did not air last week, I gave one answer. I'm actually now looking at this, and in light of listening to some comments from some other photographers last weekend at Mid-Ohio, and those whom I respect quite a bit, I'm going to change my answer. Granted, you didn't hear it last week, so I realized I just mentioned
it was really good.
Yeah, boy, it was truly the Pulitzer folks got in contact with me because they heard about it. Let me use one example, and I'll name the example of a photographer that you might consider modeling your approach after, Alex. And this is strictly on your question of how do I get noticed, how do I get them out there. So I can't speak to the quality of your photography, style, etc., equipment, access. But if we're just talking about getting your content out there, hoping it gets noticed, and then I assume hoping that someone says, hey, can I give you money to shoot photos for me? I'll name one as an example. I won't name the other as the polar opposite, but that's fine. I would say Camden Thrasher, who I rate as one of the most talented photographers I have seen, period. at least in, modern times. And I'm not talking, the Bernard Coquier's, the Clementoskis, the Jesse Alexanders. I mean, there's the legends. There's those in the pantheon of greats. I'm not putting Camden there. I'm not putting anyone who's shooting today, for the most part, there. But Camden was a kid from the Pacific Northwest who loved sports car racing, was a fan, and got noticed by shooting from the grandstands or trackside, wherever it might be. But here was a kid with, I believe, nothing crazy expensive gear-wise, and with essentially zero access that a pro photographer would get with credentials, and blew me and other people away with what he was able to do with his eye, what he saw, and what he chose to shoot, the techniques that he used, right? So it's one thing to see a photo and take it. That's the eye. That's the, I'm framing this, I imagine this, I see the lighting, whatever it is. You can see it and you take that photo. Think of it as kind of a staged thing. Then there's the technique, whether it is a low shutter speed, high shutter speed, it's a pan, it's a whatever it is. Then there's the more movement, technical-based aspect of shooting. And this kid, who nobody had really heard of, but just started posting his photos online, blew folks away. And Camden is now paid to shoot for a variety of people. His images are regularly, whether it's on the cover or in the opening pages of Racer Magazine, for example, just phenomenal. An artist, absolute artist, but he got recognized by essentially, Alex, and I'm assuming here, sitting in the same grandstands you might, or walking around the track just trying to see where he could get to, where things might not be too obscured, and doing his best with what he could get, what he could see and what he could photograph. So that to me is the way to do things. If you have talent, if you have an eye, if you have technique, whatever it is, you can go to just about any motor race and find a variety of places to shoot that will give you quality content that you can then use on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatnot, and in theory, gain recognition. Also mention that specifically on Facebook, there's a lot of groups, Graham, whether it's a midweek motorsports listener collective, whether it's an IMSA fan club type thing, WEC, you name it, tons of groups where, folks always like posting their photography, so you have those options. There's another photographer who was at last weekend's event, and this is a person who uses all of those outlets. And I would say that that person's efforts to promote their work would exceed their talent behind the lens. Very good photographer, don't get me wrong. A lot of folks think this person is the second coming of Jesus as a photographer. And that's fine. Again, whatever people think, whatever. But I haven't seen anything from that person's lens that I couldn't take, that others couldn't take, or already take. And that's not a jealousy thing, it's not a ranking thing, it's just a statement of, I know that a Camden Thrasher can take images, see things that I don't see, right? This kid's eye is better than mine, better than it will ever be. I have seen and said the same thing about one of Daily Sports Cars contributors, Regis Lefebvre. I have
Never heard of him.
Whether it's, Pedro, Lordy, etc., Rick Dole, Bob Chapman. There are, and again, I apologize for those who I'm failing to mention. It's not intentional, but I've told all of these folks, whether I've named them or not, hey, I really love your work. You do some special stuff. And I am jealous of you because I wish I had your eye talent or technique. The person in question here, Alex, I'm mentioning this, and I'm not trying to go in on somebody and be mean, but I'm just mentioning a suggestion. You take someone like Camden, who no one knew, And everyone said, oh my God, I have to have this kid work for me and shoot for me, because he just went into the stands, went wherever, did what he did, and it was clear he was a savant. There's another photographer who is constantly on social media promoting the heck out of themselves, and from that there's been a cult that has been built behind this person because they promote what they do so heavily. And yet, again, my opinion, their work, while good and while matching up with a lot of the high quality stuff that gets put out each weekend, Graham, I would not think to hire this person to shoot for me, because I haven't seen their work stand above many names that I just mentioned. And yet, I would say status-wise, that person is probably at the top of a recognition and an appreciation standpoint, because they're so heavily engaged on the social media front. So that might be the balance to consider, Alex. Quality content being posted through the social media outlets will get you noticed, will get you shared, will get you out there and possibly recognized. If spamming people to death with your work, where those who know a truly amazing photo from those that aren't, that might actually not work in your favor. So there's a balance, I would say. And just being the guy that posts a lot of photos where the average person online says, great photo, I hate to say it, their opinion for you shouldn't matter. Folks who are not photographers giving you big thumbs up about photos that you post, that's not the audience that you're really wanting to get to. If you have other photographers, some who have mentioned saying, hey, nice work, or reaching out to some of them, maybe on whatever social media platform, saying, hey, Rick Dole, Chapman, Regis, etc., Mike Levitt, Scott LePage, Phil Abbott, so on and so forth. What do you think? Any suggestions? I'm an amateur who would love to be in your shoes one day. Those are the folks whose thoughts and opinions I would say matter. So not being critical of those who hit the like button or the share button or leave comments, but it's one thing for you and I, Graham, to say, hey, this singer is amazing or this drummer is amazing. Ultimately, it's what the singers have to say about things, or one drummer says to another, that really matters, because they know better than the rest of us. So
let me give you a couple of points on that one. Number one, I completely agree with you about Kevin the Thrasher, and that's why right now he's standing trackside on the Nordschleife shooting for Delhi Sports Car this second. So you'll be able to see exactly what MP's actually talking about there if you're interested in that, and the eye, the composition, all of that. I'd take a look at that stuff. The other thing I'd say is this. I mean, someone who I co-own a internet sports car based magazine, and we've got a squad of guys around the world, including many of those guys that you've actually mentioned, that do this either for a living or for a paying hobby, and do a very, very good job of it. And they're generally there because they can do two things, and they can do two things more or less to order. They can provide photographs relevant to editorial use, which aren't necessarily the really truly artistic one. They are just well-composed pictures that show the cars are racing or show incident in a particularly well-composed way. And yes, we also want to see what they can do on the artistic front. And those two things are not necessarily the same thing. At times they can be. But the other bit of advice I give you is this. I get probably a couple of emails a month from people asking whether or not, we'll give them a shot, and on the odd occasion we've done that. But generally speaking, they tend to feature the same kind of phraseology, which is, I've never really had a chance because I've never been able to go trackside. You've got a chance. There are plenty of places where you can use your eye, be clever, whether or not it's trackside, it's in a paddock, wherever it is. It doesn't matter what the picture is of. We can tell what a good picture looks like, what a good photographer looks like, what a good eye really is. And the way that kind of works is we've had young photographers through our gates. There are, three at least that have or do work for Delhi Sports Car that have won or been highly commended in the UK's Young Photographer of the Year. It is possible to get the attention of people who can get your work to a wider audience. Everything that MP has just told you is absolutely true. Get trackside in the stands or in the spectator areas and do the best you can And you know what? Drop me a line. Drop another editor a line. Show them that you're actually passionate about it. Don't bombard us with 50 pictures. Pick 2 or 3 of the best and write a decent note to go with it. You never know. At some point, someone's going to call you back and say, let's have a chat.
And I'll throw in one other thing, Alex, because this is somewhat prevalent today, and maybe we can blame Instagram. Filters. Heavy Photoshop production, post-production work. Again, if you're wanting to show what you can do, I know some folks, and again, this is me admitting jealousy once again, who can do things in Photoshop, who know all of the tricks in Photoshop and Lightroom and Photo Mechanic and this. I mean, know how to take a regular photo. Because, you know, when we sit in the media center, inevitably I'll be at a track somewhere where there are rows, and I'll be sitting behind a photographer and, you know, between whatever we'll look over. And, I mean, I watched one who took a very ordinary photograph. And, you know, this is truly something that anybody, even with your mobile phone, you could have stood at that corner and taken the same photo. And watched him, and it was artistry, Graham, watched him work every color, every shading, every light tweak, took a photo that was as boring and common as could be, and when he was done, I mean, that thing should have been placed in the Louvre. I mean, it was, you know, print that out and, you know, tape it to the wall somewhere, maybe the roof in the Sistine Chapel. It was art, pure artistry, but it wasn't the photo that he took. It was using all of the possibilities within software to get it there. And so I'm not, you know, you might have clients that say, hey, we want you to do these things. That's great. Again, I'm not saying that using all of the digital production tools should be completely thrown out the window. I use them a little bit depending on what I need to do. But point being, Alex, is if you're trying to showcase your work, the people who are going to look at your work and potentially say, aha, I want to give him money, they're going to know if the thing has been crazily processed, and then realize that, oh, well, this guy must not be able to shoot because he needs to go into Photoshop or whatever and tweak the living heck out of it to try and create something that looks really pretty and dazzling. So, again, if you're trying to demonstrate your work, just try and think of what you're presenting as being something that you really want to be an honest representation of what you can do with a camera, not how good you are to spruce it up after it's been taken, at least in the getting recognized phase. So, and if you have more questions, Alex, shoot me a direct message or whatever, or Graham, and I can at least try and pass on whatever I might think. All right, we are at the conclusion here, Mr. Goodwin, Shia Adam or Adam Shea. You want to take that one and take us home?
I will. My computer's just having gone to sleep. This is Shia Adam. I think maybe it's the Middle East. Maybe?
Possibly.
Yeah. Here's a question I pose to many people at the Raw. We'll have our favourite tracks. What's your go-to restaurant near a track? For example, many people love Don Jose near Sebring, the Wharf at Laguna Seca, Siebkens at Road America, anywhere in the world. Do you want to go with that one first?
I'll let you, because I just rambled a lot.
Fine. I'm going to go for. We tend to go with, rather than the kind of the high cuisine, the places we can go and actually have a good night out and fun, because against most people's expectations, doing what we do is darned hard work. I know, set up the Just Giving page, all funding accepted, but we tend to go as a group to places we can have fun. And the one that always springs to mind, the one that is an unmissable, is every year at Fuji International Speedway, when after a hard day at the coal face of the World Endurance Championship, we go to the same teppanyaki restaurant, which we're always amused has a sign on the door that says it's open for 25 hours a day. Pop in there, cook the food yourself. It's good, fresh food. Clearly we're doing the cooking, so the cooking's terrible, but the company's great, the atmosphere's great. I love to find the quirky places that actually you can go, be yourselves as a group without being idiots, come away thinking that was a great night out. But we're dead lucky, we travel around Europe and the wider world, and actually saying to young Ryan Kish, who's with us here this weekend, his first trip to Europe, and we're weaning him off the Great American Hamburger. He's been told by me he is not allowed to order another hamburger until he goes home next week. He has been forced at gunpoint to try the local delicacies wherever we have been. It's first time out the US. We're now in country number 5 for him over the last 2 weeks. So it is about just embrace it, try something different. For us, it tends to be the fun side of things. Teppanyaki there, clearly it's pizza, and yes, gelato here in Italy.
Yeah, it just bums me out to hear about another American at a sports car event international sports car event, who refuses to actually eat the local cuisine. And
no, he's not refusing. He's not refusing.
Oh, okay,
he's
okay.
now.
All right,
No, it's not refusing, and we have now got him to the point where he knows that resistance is futile. We are Borg-like in our quest to actually make sure that that happens. But yes, you can't have an international outlook without trying the food.
Yes, knowing where to find the McDonald's near Monza, that's maybe not so good. All right, well, my contribution to close the show on this topic, Mr. or Mrs. Shadia Adam, I would say Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Indiana, Mug and Bun. If you think of yourself like a automotive vehicle, and you might be a few quarts low on oil, Mug and Bun has you covered, Graham, because trust me, I don't think they have ever changed the oil that they deep fry things in. And I also am fairly confident they want to make sure that with every bite, you are properly lubricated from the inside out. It is a place renowned locally. My friend and colleague Robin Miller goes. Actually, I don't think he goes to the Mug and Bun anymore. He realized it might have been killing him. It is a place that is as American and Midwest and greasy spoon as you can possibly find. They have everything is fried, from massive onion rings to pork tenderloin sandwiches, where the actual fried and breaded pork tenderloin patty is 2 to 3 times the size of the bun that it rests between. It is a place, Graham, where I tried to go to multiple times in the past. I now allow myself one visit, and since I'm often in Indianapolis and Speedway more than once a year, I don't mean once per visit. I mean once per period. Once per year. I'm heading there for 18 days, and to me it's like walking up to the edge of a cliff. I drive by it often on the way in or out, and it's one of those things you're like, Does
it have a gravitational pull?
Oh no, I probably jerk the steering wheel away because it scares me. But it is indulgence at its highest level. The food is murderous. I mean, truly, some of the products sold there should be sentenced to death, because the products, when you buy them, are actually trying to kill you. So, but I'll tell you, again, if you've never been, Mug and Bun, you have to try it once. You'll realize why so many Americans are obese and our healthcare system is completely spun out of control and so costly. Mug and Bun might be the epicenter of most American problems that I just mentioned right there. The one thing I will say, Mr. or Mrs. Adam, is Mug and Bun, outside of the food, they make one thing themselves, which I have to admit, I don't know if folks like it. It's probably might be more of an American thing, but they make their own root beer. It's indescribably good, Graham. And you can either buy it in just a regular, little drink container. They even sell it by the gallon. And I will admit, years ago, knowing that I was going to be in Indy for a while, I think my hotel had a little refrigerator. I did actually buy a gallon, and I didn't drink it all at once, thankfully, because you'd be speaking to me from the morgue. But I did enjoy it, parsed out over however many days. It's just, again, it's an indulgence that might kill you, but you're gonna smile, you're gonna giggle, you're gonna wonder that for the following days why your skin has such a nice sheen. That, again, is purely based on the oil that is coming out through your pores. That's one that I would say that's it. And I'm not saying it's the best. I'm just saying that of all the places I go to each year, there are a lot of wonderful restaurants nearby, the variety of places that we go. That's the one where everyone that I know that I've turned the place on to said, all right, I've been hitting the gym really hard. I've been putting in an extra hour a day on my bicycle or whatever, trying to train. I've been running a few extra miles to try and bring my health to a status where my system can withstand a trip to Mug and Bun without having to get out, the little paddles and clear and giving folks a little jump start to get their heart going. So Mug and Bun, it is a dare. Running with the Bulls in Pamplona, okay, mildly dangerous. Mug and Bun, I think, might actually be a little bit higher, Graham.
Fantastic stuff. What a joy. Travel can be a chore, but, take your time. It can be a joy as well. Great question from the Adam Shea there.
All right, well, first of all, please, when we're done, go downstairs and kick someone at United Autosport, unless folks like to hear of repeated wheel guns firing off here. But, come on. We've got a podcast to record. Any pithy things like pit stop practice clearly don't
Well,
matter.
just in front of them, actually, the other thing that's going on in my line as we close the show is Yannick Dalmas, 4-time Le Mans winner and driver. Sorry, he's the race director's driver advisor, is cooperating with the local medical teams on an extraction exercise, oddly enough, in the S&P Dallara. Somewhat ironic, bearing in mind the conversations had earlier, but all that's going on. Sun is beginning to start to head towards the horizon here at Monza. We've got one heck of a weekend of racing ahead of us.
Follow along on dailysportscar.com. I also know some of that great content will make its way over to racer.com, so please follow there as well. Graham, we went about a half hour over, but you know what? We don't mind. We're 10 minutes shy of a full-length IMSA race, and as much as I would love to extend 10 more minutes just to say that we completed a round of the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship, you've got things to do. I've got things to do. So let's bid farewell to this episode of the Week in Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast presented by Cooper Tires, and also with some help this month from our friends at Bell Racing USA. And there's a final wheel gun to close us out. Thank you again, brother, and have a good weekend.
Cheers, guys.